With this songwriting guitar lesson, we'll show you how to expand your songwriting options on guitar from basic 3 or 6 chord progressions to more complex arrangements involving dozens of chords. It's a technique I refer to as scale and chord forms, and you can see this technique applied in such classics such as Blackbird and Dust in the Wind. So along with chord and scale diagrams, some theory talk, and looking at these song examples, we're going to cover it all with the step-by-step approach. With our previous songwriting lessons, we first introduced how to write a basic 3-chord song or progression on guitar using primary chords. And then we expanded it to using 6 chords for songwriting using relative keys. And once you have the concept of relative keys down, you pretty much have a good foundation to understand how most basic strum-along songs are composed. For example, the key of G, the 3 primary chords are G, C, and D, and the relative minor key, E minor, A minor, and B minor. Now within the key of G, there are actually dozens of chords that will harmonize with those initial 6 chords. A good example being Blackbird by the Beatles. We have some more unique chord shapes here, but they are in the key of G. They harmonize with those initial 6 chords. So this lesson is good for you if you're asking yourself, well, how did Paul McCartney come up with those unique chord shapes? Or if you're asking yourself, how can I come up with unique chord shapes for my own songwriting? Well, that's what we're going to cover with this lesson. And it's a concept I refer to as scale and chord forms, where the worlds of scales and chords are combined in order to give you more songwriting ideas. The major scale is the primary scale that provides the foundation or basic blueprint for all music theory. And most music students learn the major scale in its do, re, mi form. They look at it as merely an exercise. But in order to understand the more advanced aspects of music theory, which we're covering in this lesson, you need to understand how the primary scale is derived using intervals and steps. Now, the major scale consists of a specific arrangement of intervals or steps. And these intervals or steps are measurements of distance between notes. On guitar, these steps are measured by frets. For example, if we were to go to the 2nd string 1st fret here, a half step would be a distance of 1 fret, or a span of 1 fret. A whole step would be a distance or span of 2 frets. So a half step, 1 fret, a whole step, 2 frets. Now these steps and intervals can then be arranged into various interval patterns. And interval patterns are essentially the foundation or building blocks that all chords and scales are derived from. And so what we're going to focus on with this lesson is the interval pattern just for the major scale. And that interval pattern, which again follows the do, re, mi pattern, but we're going to use steps instead to describe it, will be whole step, half step, whole step, whole step, whole step, half step. And if we had to abbreviate that for memorization, 2 whole steps, then a half, 3 whole steps, and then a half. And let's show you how that applies to guitar. We're going to go back to that note again on the 2nd string 1st fret, which is a C note. We're going to focus on the C major scale. Now let's ascend that scale using the interval pattern. So we have starting here, and then a whole step, another whole step, a half step, whole, half. And you may recognize the do, re, mi order there. And this pattern for the key of C, again, it's going to be essential, believe it or not, for finding a bunch of chords, additional chords, in the key of C or any other key. And what I mean by any other key with this interval pattern is that this interval pattern is universal. So we're going to be able to apply this to any key. And for example, the key of, let's say, G on the bottom string, starting with G on that bottom string 3rd fret, it would be whole, half, whole, half. Now, if you actually do this, if you get this pattern down, believe it or not, it's going to tie in to being able to find dozens of chords in any key as we go to the next step. Now, in guitar, the major scale interval pattern can be used to construct the major scale over the entire fretboard. And once you can see that blueprint for the C major scale, that puts us into the world of scale and chord forms. Now, we're going to show you how to construct the C major scale from scratch in this clip to cover the whole fretboard. If you're not curious about how it's constructed, you can skip ahead, but otherwise, it's a three-step process. And starting from scratch with the blank fretboard, step one to construct the complete C major scale is to simply find C notes on every string. And we can see from the example here on the screen, we already did the second string first fret, that is a C note. We can see also where the other C notes are along the fretboard between the 0 or the open and 12th fret positions. That's step one. Step two is we need to start constructing going up each string from every C note. We already did the second string in the previous clip as an example, but we'll do it one more time here. So we have C, and then going up a whole step, we would just draw a circle. We're not concerned that it's a D note or the second degree right now. We're just concerned with identifying that as a note in the key of C. So we have a whole step, another circle, whole step, half step, whole step, whole step, whole step. Now we know there's another half, but for this construction, we're only worried about going up to the 12th fret. So we would stop right there once we get to the 12th fret. That completes step two for the string. Step one, we found a C note. Step two, we applied the interval pattern in ascending order or going up the fretboard. Step three is going down the fretboard for the remaining frets. And how you do that is by using the interval pattern in reverse order. Reversing the order of the major scale interval pattern, that would be half, whole, 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 half, whole, whole. Now, we're on the first fret, and there is another note. Remember, if there's an open string, we include it. So we do have another circle to draw in, and that would be at the open fret position, a half step going down. Those are the three steps that we use to complete constructing the second string. You apply the same method to the remaining strings. We'll do another quick example. Let's say the bottom string, 8th fret, which is C. We have a whole step and another whole step, and then we stop at the 12th fret. And then we can do a little bit more using the pattern reverse. We go down a half step, whole step, whole step, whole step, and then we do have a half step. That bottom string open, you would draw a circle. So that is the method to construct the C major scale over the whole fretboard. So if you want to try it on your own, you can do so with a blank fretboard. And doing it on your own from scratch just gives you a better idea of how things are put together. Now, this is again, the pattern is universal. Whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. You could apply this same method to any key, constructing any key over the complete fretboard. So for example, you could do the key of G, the key of D. You use the same method, and you can also construct those scales as well. So in the next clip, we're going to show you how the complete pattern looks on the fretboard. But if you want to pause the video and maybe try some scale key construction on your own, by all means do so. Here's an example of the complete major scale pattern in the key of C. And this is essentially the blueprint for the major scale in guitar that covers a span of 12 frets and then repeats. Now, being able to construct and now observe this pattern is only the first step, as we're going to introduce new chord shapes and songwriting techniques that are going to be derived from this pattern. If you also tried other keys, here is an example of the complete major scale pattern with G and D as well. And this is a 12 fret pattern that you can shift based on every key. So if you look at the key of C, say along the open position, you'll see that all the strings are open there. Well, the key of G that same pattern would occur along the 7th fret. And in the key of D, that same pattern with all 6 strings being included would start on the 2nd fret. So this is a universal pattern that shifts based on the key. And what we're going to do next is we're going to get working with scale and chord forms derived from this pattern. With the complete major scale pattern, we now have a blueprint. It's going to provide all the chord shapes and scales that harmonize together within any key. And with the concept of scale and chord forms, that's going to involve how chord shapes can be derived from the scale pattern. And the first step in understanding how this works is to take what we already know, relative keys or relative chords within a key, the 6 chords. And if we're working with the key of C now, going back, a quick review of the 6 chords in the key of C: C, F, G, E minor, A minor, and D minor. Now, prior to this lesson, hopefully we had that foundation where we knew how to find those chords. Well, with this concept of scale and chord forms, let's take a look at the first 3 frets of what we constructed in the key of C between the open and 3rd fret positions. And there is a view of the scale pattern. Well, those 6 chords, actually all of them you'll see will fit or harmonize within that pattern. If you just sort of connect your fingers to the circles, you will find all of these 6 chords are within this scale pattern. And the reason is the reason why they're the key of C, it has a relative key or relative scales. Either way you look at it, relative keys and scales, the reason why they're called relative is because they share the same 7 notes. In this case, they share the same 7 notes from the key of C major. That's why all these chords harmonize together. So if you can see now how the initial 6 chords harmonize within the scale pattern, in fact, we have the chord forms showing up on the screen here. Once you get this concept down, now let's get into expanding our chords from 6 to dozens. Now, any combination of 3 or more notes from the C major scale will produce a chord that harmonizes with the key of C. So along with those 6 chords we covered in the previous clip, there are many other potential chord shapes that can be derived from this C major scale pattern just within the first 3 frets. For example, if we were to just strum the open 4 strings, that produces a chord that will harmonize with those other 6 chords. That would be an E minor 7th chord shape. Now the thing is, to be creative with this technique or approach to songwriting, you don't have to know the name of the chord instantly. As long as you know, through using the major scale pattern, that the notes fit within that pattern, you know you have a chord that harmonizes. So if you're being creative, you may not necessarily be concerned about the name of the chord right away, just what sounds good to you. Now let's see, here's another example here. If we were to connect just the middle 2 strings along the 2nd fret, and starting from the 5th string, include the open strings with that. Again, you're just connecting the dots or landing on the circles within the pattern. That's an A sus2 chord, but that will also harmonize with these other chords in the key of C. Another chord you may have come across, a G/B chord, which again is just 2 notes that you're fretting, but you have the open strings involved as well. If we just played those middle 4 strings, that's a G/B chord form, very popular in the key of C. Now if you were to just place your first finger down on the 1st string, 1st fret, and you see you can play those open 4 strings with it, again, you don't have to know the name of the chord, but that happens to be a G7th chord. Now, just with that approach, you can see you can come up with many other chord shapes on your own just within those first 3 frets. Now, one way to get acclimated or to experiment with these scale and chord forms is to take one particular chord shape that you know. In this case, we're going to use C, and slightly alter or change the chord shape with another note from the related scale pattern. Here's what I mean. If we took the C chord and we compared that to the pattern, the C major scale pattern, we'll see that we can also play the second string open. So having our first finger on that first fret, we simply lift it. That harmonizes with the key of C. We're actually going to a C major seventh here, but we're really just focused on what note we're changing or what string we're altering. That second string first fret, second string open. If we focus just on altering the second string within the key of C, we'll see that we also have the option to place our pinky down on the second string third fret. That also harmonizes as well. That's a C add 9 chord. So if we did that sequence, C, then open, and you could apply any variation you want with that. If we did a strumming variation, now you may recognize that progression because if we apply a fingerstyle approach, we have Dust in the Wind. So a great example of taking a chord shape and altering just one note to come up with a popular melody. Another approach will be to alter the bass note or bass line of a chord. In this case with C, we go to the 5th string 3rd fret for our standard C chord shape. If we look at the scale pattern for the key of C, we also have the option to fret the 2nd fret on the 5th string, the open 5th string, so we've got a bass line of 3, 2, 0, and if we strum those chords, and what is a little bit more common, if we substitute for that middle chord a G/B chord shape, that's a popular progression in guitar songs as well. C, G/B, A minor 7th. Again, we've got that descending bass line. If we took it another step further, we can keep the descending bass line going, and we can extend it a bit, going down to the 3rd or the 6th string 3rd fret, a C/G chord where you take the 3rd finger and sort of have it lean over to mute that 5th string. Again, another option to be creative with this pattern is by altering or changing the bass line with notes within the scale pattern. Now remember, you can apply the concept of scale and chord forms to songwriting in any key. So what we have here are examples of other keys that are popular with guitar, including the key of G and the key of D, showing the scale patterns within the first 3 frets. I also have a comparison between the key of A, which is A major, and the key of A minor. Now regarding minor keys, in this case the key of A minor is related to the key of C major. The reason why they're related is because they share the same 7 notes. So the scale pattern for the key of A minor, you may note it's identical to the scale pattern in the key of C major. What differentiates between the two keys is what your focus is. If you have a progression in the key of C that may include some minor chords, if it starts and ends with a C chord, it's more accurate to describe that song as being in the key of C. If you have the song in the key of A minor, even though it may include a C, an F, and a G chord, but the progression focuses, notably beginning and ending on an A minor, it's more accurate to describe that progression or song as being in the key of A minor. Now, up until this point, we've only applied scale and chord forms within the first 3 frets. However, we do have a complete major scale pattern that covers a span of 12 frets. So if we start going beyond the 3 frets, beyond the 3rd fret position, and start applying the scale and chord form approach moving up the fretboard, you can see how this opens the door to discovering or finding dozens upon dozens of new chord voicings that will harmonize within a certain key. And let's go back to the Beatles' Blackbird to show you an example of this. The opening to Blackbird. Well, especially this chord, probably the coolest part of the song. This chord voicing here, if you actually look at the notes played and look at the major scale pattern for the key of G, you will see that these notes, they fit into the circles as well as the open strings in between. Now it makes a little bit of sense. You can see that these notes or this particular chord harmonizes with the key of G. And we're focusing on harmonization. Every once in a while, though, you'll find a song, and sometimes it's intentional, where they intentionally go out of key. In fact, in Blackbird, the very next section, there's an ascending bass line, a chromatic bass line with some notes that are out of key. That's intentional. But if you've already learned Blackbird or are about to work on it, now that you know this concept of scale and chord forms, you're going to see that about 95% of the notes in Blackbird will fall into this major scale pattern for the key of G. Some other great examples of some famous songs where you can apply this concept: Tears in Heaven by Eric Clapton, that is in the key of A major. Little Wing by Jimi Hendrix falls into the key of E minor. Even Beethoven's Ode to Joy, which a lot of people learn in the key of C, those notes will fall into the C major pattern. So you can now apply this concept to study other songwriters. And also, if you have your own songwriting ideas, you can apply scale and chord forms to help find other chords to build upon your original ideas that you're starting with.